We're parents, teachers, and educators, and like you, we're passionate about restoring our culture for Christ. This is Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education. Today we have with us Stuart McAllister, who has made a name for himself in the kingdom as an apologist, and so we'll be talking a little bit about his background and his approach to being an apologist for the Christian faith. Stuart, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
It is so good to have you here. Give us a little bit of personal information, your background, your family, your education, and maybe most notably your conversion experience, which I think our people will enjoy.
Well, I was born in Scotland, Glasgow in Scotland, and my father was a result really of the Second World War in one sense. He had been in with the Royal Air Force, met my mum, who had been raised in a Christian home, but dad was the ticket to my mother out of Christianity. She was a Nazarene background. It was holiness type of thing or whatever. She hated it, or at least hated the restraints, not Christianity. She hated the restraints, this kind of legalism. And so dad was her way out. So when I was born into a home that was, at the time in Britain, the kind of a prevailing idea was what we'd call Fabian socialism. This was a thing, the war had ended, the sort of the sense of privilege that had taken us into 2 world wars. That was the thought. Now Labour would come along and they'd kind of democratize and, make a better life for everybody. So Christianity didn't play much of a role, but in our home growing up, for some reason, I was the kid that always got my dad's ire going. I just made him angry. And I made a joke that sometimes I was 15 before I found out my name wasn't Shut Up. And also, in Scots homes, Irish homes, violence played a lot. I mean, it tended to be discipline was a slap in the face and this kind of stuff, Alcohol also played a part because my parents both, the weekends it would be, they didn't have much money, but when they did, they would just want to drink. And then when they drank, it get 2 things going on. One, my mother would get very sentimental, which I hated. And my dad would could be friendly or go angry and violent. So anyway, for me, by the time 13-year-old, like a lot of Scots boys, I was out, and I started drinking. And then one day I came home when I was 15, I'd be drinking and my dad had smelled it. And by this time it was all the kind of Alice Coopers out there and, I had long hair and I was trying to be the cool kid. But I was also running with a tough crowd, or at least I thought they were just boys. But he hit me and then I just lost it. So I ended up fighting with him. And of course he wasn't expecting that. That ended up leading to me leaving home. They did kick me out, but I was just so mad and angry. So I left. So I was on my own from 15 years of age. So imagine that. Wow. 15 years of age.
Yeah.
I got an apartment. I don't even know the details anymore, how that happened. I managed to rent a room. I had a basic job, not understanding that renting a room would take up almost all the money that you were earning, and you still had to wash clothes and eat. Anyhow, in that setting, I went off. So for a number of years, I had a roommate. It was party time. And I think it was just survivalship. But one day I was working in this place and a guy walked in and said to me, would you be interested in working in a dance hall? And what does that mean? He said, well, we'd want you to be a bouncer and, you have to patrol, look for gang fights or whatever, and be willing to throw them out. And of course, probably quite a bit of fighting. And I said, and you get paid for that? So anyhow, I joined this dance hall and that was a new world to me. So I entered into this and it was this would be a club at the weekend where maybe 1,500 to 2,000 kids came and, wow. Fights broke out and they could get pretty serious. So there were about 15 bouncers and we patrolled and then you'd get the guys and throw them out and so forth. That opened up a world for me in which I then got involved in kind of the Glasgow underworld type of thing, not the heavy part to begin with, but just the kind of wise guys. And then I started working with this man who was running a car business and he was looking for young guys, people they could trust who are untrustworthy, if you know what I mean. This is that whole world. So anyway, I come in and I started working with this guy, Monty Shabbos, his name was, and he had a car and I was driving cars, and over time he took a shine to me. So I was a kind of young lieutenant on the rise, keep your eyes open, your mouth shut, do what you're told. And, this is where I was. And all this time, of course, I'm beginning to make money. And then I took up with this married woman who I rescued from a policeman at someone else's request. Won't go into that story, but anyway, so we were living together, and I just thought, here, this is it. I'm cool. I'm in my 20, just turning 21. Get driving E-type Jaguars, Mercedes, and whatever cars from the garage. Nice girl, money. And then one day she walks in and said to ask me a question. What did I think of Jesus? And I remember, who? What? Because I thought Jesus was past the sell-by date. I honestly, I didn't. Who believed in Jesus in the 20th, and it was the 20th century at that point. Anyway, so it led to a fight, and then we separated. So for 2 weeks, I was really mad. She talked about God and the gospel, whatever that was. Then after 2 weeks, she called me and these Christians wanted to meet me. And I thought, okay, well, I'll go and meet these Christians. And I was kind of planning to re-educate them. So I go along, and the only way I can describe this was, first of all, I walked into their house, and I'd never been anything like it. I walked in and there was an atmosphere. I remember that to this day. It was just different. There was something I can't even explain. No television. And I weirdo. So who doesn't have a television? What's wrong with these people? And then they came in and they were being very polite. And I'm a bulk all bulked up because I'm powerlifting at the time. And I'm wearing a leather jacket. I'm a kid, but I think I'm some big tough guy up here. And they start talking, and Joyce was there, and they started sharing. And all I can say to you is I walked into that house pretty convinced there was no God, and it was a lot of nonsense. Began to throw out stuff. They began to talk to me. I think the wife was probably an evangelist by gifting. She was very nice, and the guy was soft and gentle. Again, not my cup of tea. So I thought, oof, but something began to happen, and I came aware that over time, now this is real. And then I had a kind of whoops feeling going on inside, because if there was a God, and it seems that there probably is now, then where am I? I'm in trouble here, because I'd been in stuff, I'd seen stuff, I'd done stuff, and the sin aspect wasn't an issue. That was absolutely clear. But the idea that there was a God that loved you, that the forgiveness was a possibility, that he was there, that he needed to be known. So I actually went that night. I went up after, I don't know how many, couple of hours we'd been talking. I went up and I went to their bathroom, and I ended up kneeling by their toilet, which I think is appropriate. I just said, God, if you're there, I need to know you. And really, that's where it began. So that was an ignition point, which when I tell this story, I can only say it was an encounter. It wasn't like a radical, but I knew something had happened. Yeah. Came down the stairs, and I'd been gone for a while. So there's you okay? And I said, yeah. I prayed. I said, God, whatever it is you do, save me. Well, then, they all come over and they start hugging me, and I was like, whoa, that was new stuff. So really, that was
reach a personal space that you weren't used to.
Exactly. Touching. Well, that's not the kind of touching I was used to. It was more like this way. So yeah, that was the beginning that really began a journey that has really gone now for over 40 odd years and still continue.
Well, I know that C.S. Lewis has played a significant role in your life. I assume it was since that moment, but tell us how his writings and his life have shaped your thinking.
So about 10 years into the Christian life, the young days, I started off as a typical, I was hungry for God in the Bible. So I was reading the word, I was reading scripture, reading Christian books, usually within a very narrow confine, because that's what people were feeding me. And I thought that's all there was. When I discovered Lewis, I went through a period, and it wasn't just Lewis, it was Lewis, and of course Schaeffer would be another one. Really about 10 years in, I think it was like a second conversion where I kind of had an awakening to the Christian worldview, to understand that God spoke to all of life. And the things that I really loved, like literature or say history and so forth, I didn't just need to read a Christian book. I could read a historical book, but then I could begin to see it through biblical lenses. So what Lewis did when I was introduced to him was this incredibly rigorous, logical mind but yet who could take these concepts and clarify them and bring together scripture and real life. And that's what I was looking for. I was looking for someone, and I think the word that Lewis said of himself when he was accused by churchmen of kind of breaking the boundaries, he wasn't a theologian. And he said, my mission is translation. And that's what I think I
Oh, I love that.
Lewis early on. I think it's he translated into an idiom where I saw him publicly speaking to Britain, and then beyond, even at my age, 40, 50 years on, his books were speaking with a power, even though the language was dated. The concepts were eternal and wonderful. So yeah.
Yeah, that's I love that word. I had never heard it put that way, but it really does capture the work of Lewis to think in terms of translation. That's really good. Some of the work that you've done in recent years has to do with evangelism of our own children and raising faithful kids. You've written on it. Talk to us about what you were trying to do in your writing and what are the key elements in success that way.
Well, basically what happened was when, of course, I still have a bit of a Scottish accent, but my son Cameron, it sounds very American. And people began to connect. They would see us in events and they suddenly see the name and realize, oh, they're related. So we would be teaching, say, something on the apologetics in the Christian life, maybe the problem of evil or Christianity in the modern world. And then people start asking questions about father and son. How did we handle that? Or how did you handle movies? How did you handle music? How did you handle... So we then started devoting a couple of Q&As just at request to that. And we began to see a pattern. We also started getting pigeonholed by parents, me as a father, him as a son. Okay, you grew up in a Christian home. What were the problems? And oftentimes we had a real difficulty with Christian parents bringing this kind of like fix my child thing, and that was always awkward, to try and talk through with a parent present on issues for a kid. And not to give it, because there's things that had to be talked about, but it's the how, not the what. Right. It was often the issue. Yeah. So really what we tried to do, Cameron came up with the idea of this book and Faith That Lasts, A Father and Son in Conversation, was an InterVarsity Press. And really in the process, it was very, very redemptive for me because part of the things, he saw things in my narrative that I had missed and that he could then connect the dots. But what we were getting this in so here was the thing. I was raised in a non-Christian home. And I wondered, how could my fear was always that I would anesthetize or my kids would be inoculated, because that's what I saw, sadly. I saw Christian kids who didn't care a hoot about the gospel, didn't have any passion for mission, didn't love the Lord, didn't love truth. They were always, what's the latest music? Can we get sex on the side? All these kind of things, which is, that's normal in life, it comes. But why wasn't the love there? So this is what we're trying to tackle. And of course, we had gone through our share with the teenagers, with Cameron and my daughter, and had the bumpy years and had the confrontations and had all that. But we saw a pattern. There were three things that we wanted to address. One was the use of fear as a controlling mechanism, trying to scare your kids into the kingdom almost, or using the fear. The idea that information safe, so just dumping endless amounts of facts on them, but not necessarily weaving that truth into their life. And then the third was outsourcing your kids, outsourcing the family. So that, the kids would come home and say, well, what about this? Or they'd have a general question about, and mom and dad wouldn't know and wouldn't care, or think, oh, well, let's wait and postpone it. And then sometimes in church, they got the same thing. Yeah. So rather than apologetics being a specialist ploy, what we were trying to say is that Peter says, always be prepared to give a reason for the hope that you have. So hope has to be present, and your ability to give a reason for it has to be present too. And that's a cultivated thing. And it doesn't need to be
easy as parents to fall prey to each of those three concerns. Wow. Yeah, I have to think about that, because there are, we're at Veritas, we're dealing with parents with their K-12 kids. Yeah. Of course, I have children of my own, and those are very serious concerns, both in a home level and with what we do and encouraging parents and how to do the right thing. Give us an example or two of how you've been able to be effective as you've worked with people.
Well, so part of the thing has always been to, I'm a big believer in, Stephen Covey's principles and 7 Habits of Highly Effective leaders, and then it became other book, it morphed into.
Yeah, I am too. I think he did some good work, and it
There's
was
some good
brilliant.
ideas. So the idea, but his principles: seek first to understand, then to be understood. Stephen and Rabbie Burns, the Scottish poet, says, "Oh, to see ourselves as others see us." I think one of the great failures within our modern church is one of the problems we have is that we've been so convinced of answers, so convinced of our own knowledge, that at times a danger of arrogance and ignorance has actually framed what we do. So that what people hear, they hear a tone and they don't actually get the truth because they hear an assertion being given to me, and an ignorance of other factors that might be psychology, and other factors, maybe things that play into this, history that needs to be looked at, people's own experience that must be weighed. So that more incarnational, and that was Lewis's genius. You see, Lewis, when you look at the Chronicles of now, all of Lewis's books, some of the ones that were written as apologetic, they're there in his other writings. Like the Abolition of Man, you can look at the Space Trilogy and you can see the same story. But because he understood that the key to the heart was the imagination. So he said, reason is the organ of truth, imagination is the organ of meaning. And the one place that he didn't add in that, but it was in his writings, is that desire is the order of affection. So those three things must come together: reason, imagination, and desire. And the postmodern world, the world we're living in, is all about desire. So when we were talking, or when I was doing a talk, or when I do talks, I try to get into the desire space, because there's where people are living. And their imagination is already occupied. It's colonized. It's like the Borg from Star Trek. You've been soaked up, and your biological and technological distinctives have been taken over. But the gospel, I think, has penetrating power. This is where the spirit and truth works, that God can penetrate that. But they've got to kind of feel it. They've got to get that sort of awakening. There's got to be that soul stirring, which I think, and that's what God the Spirit does. I think as the Holy Spirit intervenes, then they begin to see the glimmer of the light of the truth, and and so forth. So I think our need is for patience, not to rush the process. So talk to people, and I did that with our kids. We had this, as parents do, the early days with movies and songs. And at first, in my early days, I would have been a pietist, withdraw, watch nothing, build up the fortress, stay inside the bubble, live protected, make sure, bomb-proof shelters.
Yeah.
And realize and it's more so today because the porosity of our time. With phones and everything else, you can't do that.
Christianity is not playing defense.
No, that's right. And so we must believe greater is in he that's in our world. And all of our armor in the Bible is forward. There's nothing for our back. So why are we running? So, well, that means then we must have a robe greater is he. How do we form the mind and the conscience and the heart?
Yeah. What world of apologetics sometimes has what I might call prickly aspects between being evidential and presuppositional.
Yeah.
How do you find that discussion?
Well, here's what I found. You have people, unfortunately, like as so many other things, we have turned apologetics into apologetics industry. It's the Apologetics Inc. And therefore you have all these specialist you have these guys who go off and do a PhD in this and a PhD in that and get multiple, and they think it's all about the head and arguments and winning fights. And of course, I don't think that's, I think apologetics should not be a thing unto itself. It was a tool added to witnessing.
Yeah.
So I think the whole idea, am I a classical apologist? Am I evidentialist? Am I presuppositionalist? And my answer is yes, I am. Because it depends on the context. It really does. So if I'm talking to a Muslim or a Hindu, and they start raising things about, say, Krishna or Vishnu, or all is one, Atman is Brahman, Brahman is Atman, or Allah is one, and the doctrine of Tawheed, and that Jesus couldn't possibly have been God, then we're going to be talking about presuppositions. I'm going to be looking, but what am I going to be employing? I'm looking at evidence. I'm going to be challenging the evidence that they present, and I'm going to present evidence and try to make arguments and in that sense, more classical, arguing towards. Right. So it's an abductive argument. It's not inductive or deductive. It has all of those, but we're looking to the bigger picture, because that's what Christianity does. It gives coherence. So I think to lock into a school and have these internecine fights between each other, who's the right mirror on the wall, who's the most pure apologist of them all, it just becomes silly. We distract time and energy rather than saying, measure yourself against how effective are you actually communicating with people? Are you talking to them? Are you showing love? Is anyone listening?
Do
And
you
it's not,
care?
not being pragmatic, but I'm talking about just being compassionate, being
Yeah,
genuinely,
yeah,
and that whatever apologetic, like Paul said, I became all things to all men, that by all means. So that's what I think apologetic, and this takes us right back to where the question about Lewis. Lewis saw himself again as a translator. So the translator, what's the translator do? He is very concerned with communication, but getting meaning across.
yeah.
So I'm saying words, they're coming back. We're missing the meaning. We're dancing all over the place. What would Lewis do? Well, Lewis would come up with a story or a picture or a character or a little fawn with feet, and things play, or a witch or something. Like he would come up with Turkish delight that, once you taste it, oh, you get mad and you want more, you're craving. Well, you're seeing the theology of sin just in deception and lies, but you get it in here.
Yeah. Well, your point, I think, that can be real simply emphasized is caring for the person you're dealing with, you're talking to. It's
Well,
about caring for them. It's about loving them.
that's exactly right. So to me, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength, your neighbor as yourself. The heart of all love is communication, isn't it?
Yes.
For God so loved the world, he gave, he communicated, he came to us, and he did a way that we can understand. We have put communication, and particularly America today, we're so polarized that I will only talk to you if I get the words right and if I get the meaning right. And if you start waving some flag and it's red or it's blue or whatever, woo, it's multicolored, then I'm not going to talk to you. You're an enemy, you're darkness. And so I'm on the defensive. And fear does not allow us to communicate.
That is really good. One of the things that you've had too, and that I've seen as I read a bit about you in preparation for this was what you think in terms of effective approaches to apologetics. Of course, we've been covering some of that already.
Yeah.
But you've used the phrase in anxious times.
Yeah.
And I tend to think of that maybe as a post-COVID area, but you're talking about a much more significant definition of anxious times, or a much more extensive. Tell us what you mean by that when you use the term anxious times.
Well, there's a range of books come out. James Davidson Hunter's new one on solidarity and communication, talking about the meltdown in the United States. You've had people like Anne Applebaum, who's been talking about the rise of oligarchs. We've had Fareed Zakaria's book, Look at the Age of Revolutions, and there's a whole bunch, Neil Ferguson and many others. I think what people are recognizing that globally, we're in an epochal shift. We came from the post-World War II settlement. We had been at the end of the war. We had the rise of the nuclear age, and you had the balance of powers, the bipolar world, which ostensibly came to an end theoretically in 1989 and then 1991 with the fall of the Soviet Union and the rise of Russia. But then we had the revenge of history. So we came back now to all the underlying stuff in all parts of the world. And meanwhile, some of the decisions we had made in the West had fueled, obviously, the rise of China as a significant entity. India, at 1.4 billion people, and with a 7.5% or something GDP now. All of these countries growing, the Muslim world who wanted to modernize but not westernize. And this is the problem. We thought modernization and westernization were the same thing. So we had this idea of globalization as a uniform culture in which democracy, the free markets, and liberalism would all basically somehow rule the world. And now we're back in the world of oligarchs and power and threats, as you said, COVID and these things, which were, I think, symptomatic. Maybe a whisper from God that the rational made human order will not hold. It only takes a little virus to puncture your little security there. So what we're seeing is, when I say the word, we had the modern to the postmodern, which was in the age of modernism, everything was about rationality and reason, scientific man, the vision of science, reason, the end of religion, and progress. So postmodernism now and attacks Christianity, but now attacks all those things. So we're not really scientific. We don't trust reason. Progress is up for question. So now we question everything. The only thing we're left with is radical doubt. And when you doubt everything, like Francis Schaeffer said, we're standing with our feet firmly in midair. So we have no place to stand. So where does anxiety come in? Because every child and every adult has to define everything about everything all the time, and it could change tomorrow.
Yeah.
You can't live that. We need coordinates. We need to know, we need stability. We need structure, family. We need roots. We need direction. Is there such a thing? If truth is totally subjective. So here's, Philip Reeve said, this is the age of psychological man. Religious man was born to be to be saved. Psychological man is born to be pleased. So the greatest shift in our time is that psychology, not philosophy, is ruling. It's all about feeling. So looking good and feeling good replace being good and doing good. And we do not know the difference anymore. Yeah. Not often in the church either.
How does that affect what you do this afternoon?
Well, I have a mission statement that I felt was, something I've been called to. So I do what I do. I just take divine appointments. If it's with an individual, like your invitation that came kindly, I'll do this. And I'm actually going to do a podcast with my son and his friend just after this. I'll do those kind of things. I'll meet with individuals. I'll preach in our church. We'll do a Sunday school class. I've got a group. So I work wherever I can to do like the Matthew 13. It's the leaven of the kingdom. I will sow the seeds, but I'm not going to be anxious. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and those who dwell in it. So I live coram Deo, as our dear friend used to always exhort people, in God's presence, under his authority, for his glory. So it's not my job to fix the world. I can't change the world. But even as we're gathering here, 5,000 plus people are in Incheon at Lausanne. And there's and they're thinking about mission. They're praying, God is working. And I know from that, there's going to be huge things come out of it. Not that it's all perfect or all right, but God is moving. And so I think stop looking at the darkness and look at the promises. Let's be a people of hope. Let's be a people of expectation. Use the Lewis thing. Lewis wrote some of his best books during the Second World War. One of his greatest sermons was written in the Way of Glory. It's when Britain is, they're right in the midst of the Second World with not clear understanding that there would be one.
Yeah.
So, it doesn't take circumstances out there. It's the word and his promises and getting our coordinates clear,
Yeah. That's wonderful. Well, we have really enjoyed having you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I love the idea of just doing where God leads in a way that has knowledge and wisdom attached to it, but it's not so institutionally bound that it has made it hard to work in God's kingdom for God's glory.
Right. So I think John Stott famously said, the incarnation is the model for mission. The word became flesh and dwelt amongst us. So the word becomes flesh through us. And God still moves us. We're his agents.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Folks, thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time here on Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education. Bye-bye.